So today we're looking at shucking oysters. So let's start with what you need beside oysters. So obviously you need oysters in good condition. You want to keep those oysters cold. You want to keep them in your refrigerator if you have them. You want to keep them covered with a damp cloth, but you don't want them sitting in water. So we've got oysters. What else do we need? You need an oyster knife. You need a shucking knife. There are 1,000 different types of oyster knives. Just like there are 1,000 different types of oysters, there's two things that you want in an oyster knife: a knife that you're comfortable with and a knife that will work on the oysters that you have. So I like knives with a nice point on them of some type to get into the oyster. But for some of the big oysters that I've opened, I want a thicker blade, a blunter point to deal with that shell. So I'll put these aside in a minute, but critically, please have something to protect your hand. I shuck enough oysters, I've invested in one of these chainmail gloves. These are probably somewhere in $40, $50, pretty commonly available. I love the chainmail because not only does it keep the knife from going into my hand, it actually helps absorb some of the impact. If you don't have one of these, I highly recommend wearing a glove that will give you some protection, or potentially, if you don't have that, even just a dish towel that you can fold and put over the oyster to give you a little bit of protection for your hand. All right, so we've got a tool. I'm gonna go with this one. I like the point on this, I like the length of the blade, and I like the pistol grip for shucking a lot of oysters. How do we get into an oyster? Well, there's a couple ways to get into an oyster besides using a hammer. One would be shucking from the hinge, back shucking, and I'll show you that. That's my preferred method. There's side shucking, where you go in from the side, and there's bill shucking, where you go in from the lip. There are people who are very good at each of these. Let me show you what this looks like inside the oyster. So I've opened up an oyster already to show you what we're going to try to do. So the oyster is made up of two shells that are closed together. Well, what holds those together? Well, if you open up the oyster, the thing that was holding this oyster together was this adductor muscle. So this muscle right here, this tissue, was attached here. In fact, you can see I left a little bit of that muscle tissue on the top shell. That's attached to the top shell and the bottom shell. And the oyster is staying closed by pulling tight on that muscle. So the way we get into this oyster is we sneak in from one of the angles, either the hinge, the side, or the bill, and then we cut across the top valve, the top shell there, to free the top shell from the oyster. And then ultimately, we're going to also make sure that we get that oyster free of the bottom shell. So you can see right there, I've cut the shell loose, and so now that meat is loose in the shell. So let me put that over here. One of my tricks that I found, if I put this oyster here on this plate, it might spill its oyster liquor. So one thing I've done is I sometimes use the shell that I just used to sort of hold the oyster. All right. Shucking an oyster. Let's pick out, the oysters are going to present you a lot of challenges. Every oyster is different, all right? But if you're going to hinge shuck, you're going to look for the place where these two shells meet. So if I put my knife there, you can sort of see between, that is where I'm trying to get the knife in. Again, you could try to do it here, or you could try to do it here, but you can see these are not as obvious to people as that hinge. That hinge, once you get an eye for it, is pretty clear. What you're looking for here is where this top shell meets this bottom shell. So if you look at the oyster, you got this curve to it. You're gonna go back to that hinge, find that hinge. A lot of people feel more comfortable putting an oyster down to shuck it rather than holding it up in the air. So take your knife, get a firm grip on the oyster, and then you're gonna take that point and you're gonna wiggle it. Now, I'm not shoving that point in there. Wiggle the knife in. I'm not sure that's in enough, but I'm gonna try turning it. Nope, so the hinge falls apart. And look, that's gonna happen. Like, I got a little bit of shell breakage, and that just comes off. That's okay, that's no big deal. Just clean off the knife, go back in. Now, what I don't wanna do is, let's see, get that knife in. Once I've got that point in enough, and notice the angle, I'm not trying to go across with the knife. I'm not trying to go straight down. I'm trying to get underneath this top valve. So push, and then I twist. So if you can see there, I've twisted, and I've started to separate these two shells. I cheat a little bit, and I use my thumb to help hold those shells apart while I clean off the shell bits from my knife. Now I'm going to lever the oyster open. Now remember what we're trying to get to. We're trying to get to that adductor muscle. So I take the knife, now I pick it up. I've got the knife going across here, across the oyster. Now I just lever the blade across. And if I didn't sever it completely, I go back and I cut through. And when I flip it open, that's what we're looking to get. I nicked a little bit of the oyster there on the way in. You can clean it off if you want, get any of that little bits out of there. Sometimes when you come in through the hinge, you'll get a little bit of shell bit there. Get that out of the way, and then flip the oyster around, and then cut underneath that muscle. All you do is you push the knife right down against the shell. Try to get that as clean as possible. So if you're trying to impress your friends, you leave that oyster as is, because people who shuck oysters will recognize that the oyster is laying in its shell the way that it was when you opened it. If you have any concerns about how the oyster looks, because if you nicked it, or if you just want to be sure that it's shucked all the way, you can flip it over. I had one of the fishermen in the bayou told me that this is the Philadelphia flip because you're hiding a bad shucking job by doing it. It is also another way to find out that for sure the oyster has been opened up. There we go. And I don't have these on ice because I plan on putting these on the grill, especially if you're going to serve raw. I would make sure that oysters are coming from ice and going on to ice after you shuck. You want to keep them cold for the whole duration. People love oysters from the grill. They love the flavor, and it has the advantage, if you're the one in the house who's been asked to open up these oysters, that you can use the grill to help get oysters open. So we've got oysters in the shell, and you can shuck these, but some people like to take them just like this and put them on the grill. We've got this grill going at about 400 to 500 degrees, and I put oysters in the shell on the grill about 5, 6, 7 minutes ago, and I want to show you what that does. So if you can see these oysters, it's clear that they're starting to cook, all right? I've got one, I'll take it right up. This oyster is open. So you can see that that oyster's actually opened up. It hasn't popped all the way open, but it's open and we can get into it, it's cooked. This other oyster, this is one of the problems with doing them on the grill. This oyster is clearly cooked, it's bubbling, but you see, it's not easy to, it's still not quite that easy to get into. So I'm gonna take that off. I will tell you that one of the things that we've seen with that, I'll put a bunch of oysters on the grill and some will never open up. They're just, they get stuck shut. I don't know what it is, but they won't open up. You'll have others that do. My favorite way to do them on the grill, if you are comfortable shucking, is to put shucked oysters on the grill. So I'm gonna let this warm up a little bit here, but all right, we've got these oysters. All right, that's good. All you do is take your oysters that you have shucked. We're gonna put them on the grill, as is. We're not gonna put anything on them yet. I'm just arranging them because I just want them to start to cook here. So no sauce, nothing, but they're open. Let's close that up. You're gonna let your grill get hot again, you're gonna let them cook. So I sort of do this by feel, but it's probably about 3-4 minutes depending on the temperature of your grill. So we'll wait for that. For the oysters that we put on the grill in the shell, so we didn't do any shucking, I just want to show you what this looks like. So be careful, because the oyster can be pretty hot. So I let these cool off a little bit. But remember, when you're trying to shuck an oyster, the adductor muscle is right in here. So now the oyster's popped open, so I don't have to do that much work now to just make sure that's cut through, and then whoops, pop that off. So you can see that is still, oh, that's actually loose. So that is a semi-cooked oyster. If you're not comfortable eating raw oysters, this may not be something that I would consider a cooked oyster by seafood safety standards, but that one was easy because the bill had gaped open. On this one, I just want to show you, this can be the challenge, right? I don't see any good place to get into this oyster that was on the grill the same amount of time as the other oyster. So I can play, I don't have my glove on, so I'm gonna be a little careful, but let's see if okay, there. I got the knife in at the bill, I'm gonna just twist it, and then remember, where's the adductor muscle? It's right here. So I'm just gonna cut back, then I bring the knife down here and pop it open. There we go. And that is a perfectly good way to get into oysters. All right, so you can see that the oyster liquor is starting to bubble. So these oysters are cooking. In fact, I might have been able to do this even a minute or two ago, started with this butter sauce, because those oysters, I don't want to overcook them, all right? This is just butter sauce with some lemon juice, some hot sauce, some herbs, and this gets to be the fun part where you start a fire. So watch your hands. I'm trying to spill some of this butter sauce on the fire, because I actually want those flames to come up. All right, so they're starting to cook. I'm gonna just, you can see these are getting really hot because this grill is hot. While we're here, sometimes I'd wait on this, let that cook. I'm just gonna sprinkle some Parmesan and Romano cheese over these. Not a lot. Why not a lot? Cheese is great, right? But these oysters are great, and so especially if you've gotten really nice oysters, some of these farm-raised oysters, we're trying not to bury the flavor of that oyster. We just want to complement that. So let me close that up for just a second. Just let that cheese melt a little bit. And this is going to depend on how done you want your oysters. I don't want my oysters that done. I don't want them overcooked. So you can see some of these oysters are starting to get kind of almost a little dry, and I don't want that. So I'm going to pick those off first, the ones that look like they're going to basically overcook. If you have somebody that's not comfortable eating raw oysters, cook the oysters longer, because some of these oysters are not fully cooked all the way through, but you can see that they're firmed up. But you can leave some on. And of course, you're going to find with this that you get some hot spots on your grill. They're not going to all be done at the same time, all right? So you can see some of these oysters, this one in the middle, look how like that's gotten charred up, and that's okay. And again, you could leave some of these on. If you've got people that are not comfortable, just let them keep cooking. Do warn your guests that the shells and the sauce and the oyster are still very hot. People jump on these. So I do want to have one warning about this. When you put any oyster on the grill, whether you're doing it this way or when it's in the shell, sometimes there could be pockets of water in those oyster shells. It might be because of barnacles or just some parts of the shell that are holding water. When that water boils, you can get it popping and actually shell shooting off. So I would be careful with anybody around the grill, and the person who's monitoring the grill, it's probably best if you keep it closed for as much as possible. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
You might have to give it a little push to get it off the shell, just because they're free of the shell, but you might have to give a little wiggle on it.
Oh, hot.
They should now be cool enough that there shouldn't be any butter that burns your face.
Thank you.
Oh, it goes for the big one. I like it.
Yeah, let's go for a, okay, look at there.
So yeah, sometimes you give it a little scooch. Is that all right?
Oh, wow.
That one's really good.
That's delicious.
There's enough for seconds.
Thank you.
I'll take your. Some people are going to be intimidated by shucking. I mean, it's a knife and you're using force. And so one of the tricks that somebody showed me is the idea of taking these oysters in the shell, putting them in a plastic shopping bag, closing the bag, and then putting them in the microwave. Now remember, what are we trying to do here? We're just trying to get that oyster to open up a little bit. We're not trying to cook this oyster. So let's take a look at what we've got here. So take the knife. You can see the liquor is starting to come out, so that these oysters are starting to, there you go. You can see that I can sort of slide the knife in there now and separate it, lift it up, and there we go. All right. Now that was in the microwave enough that has started to cook just a little bit, but that's still going to be a nice oyster to serve up. All right. Again, see. All I'm trying to do, I'm not trying to force that knife in there. I was trying to find the point where there, the knife is in. Make sure that we're separated on the top, and then pull that back. There we go. You can see, good to go. And you can see it's not fully cooked, as obviously the adductor muscle is still attached there. I definitely prefer shucking without using the microwave if I can, but if you are concerned at all and looking for a way to try to help get into some of those oysters, you're a first timer or you're just not comfortable with the hinge shucking method, using that microwave is one way to sort of give you an advantage.